Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the key to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome back to the Project Management Prepcast, where you suddenly start to understand how the concepts of the PMBOK guide fit together. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In this lesson, we look at the Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis process, which is part of Project Risk Management. The process aims at analyzing numerically the probability of each risk and its consequences on your project's objectives. After our usual overview, we will review the difference between performing qualitative and quantitative risk analysis. Then we will see that this process may not be used as fully on all your projects as the PMBOK guide describes it. So knowing when to apply this process is important to cover. Also, we'll look at how the process is commonly conducted, and we'll see a few types of distributions as well. The PMBOK guide defines project risk management as the knowledge area that includes the processes of conducting risk management planning, risk management identification, analysis, response planning, as well as risk management controlling on a project. And even though the previous slide only had 5 bubbles around project risk management, we have 6 processes that help us execute all of that. It all begins with plan risk management. This is the process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for a project. Here we lay the foundation for the other 5 processes. Then we move on to identifying our risks in the Identify Risks process. This is the process of determining which risks may affect the project and documenting their characteristics. Then we move on to Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis, the process of prioritizing risks for further analysis or action by assessing and combining their probability of occurrence and impact. And did you hear that I said we prioritize the risks for further analysis? Because the further analysis is what happens in the next process, in Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis. This is the process of numerically analyzing the effect of identified risks on overall project objectives. Now that we know all about our risks and how they will affect our project, we want to plan risk responses. What are we going to do about all of these risks that we have? This is the process of developing options and actions to enhance opportunities and to reduce threats to project objectives. But in the end, since we had a plan at the beginning, plan risk management at the beginning of our knowledge area, we have control risks at the end because we want to keep control of everything we do. This is the process of implementing risk response plans, tracking identified risks, monitoring residual risks, identifying new risks, and evaluating risk process effectiveness throughout the project. Here you see the processes of project risk management that you will find in the PMBOK guide. And as we have just learned, we have 6 processes in this process group, and the first 3, plan risk management, identify risks, and perform qualitative risk analysis, we covered in previous lessons. Our focus now is on the perform quantitative risk analysis process, which is part of the planning process group. The main concept of this process is closely tied to the difference between perform qualitative and perform quantitative risk analysis. The qualitative risk analysis is the process where you prioritize your risk by probability and impact. Here, in perform quantitative risk analysis, the risks are analyzed based on as much objective data as possible and given numerical ratings or quantities. Hard numbers or more definitive numbers help quantify the uncertainty and thus enable more proper planning of actions to address identified risks. But let's do a proper review and see the difference between the two processes side by side. So we have qualitative risk analysis and quantitative risk analysis. First, qualitative analysis is subjective in nature. It seeks to set a quality or impression of the likelihood of an event of occurring and the impact if that risk were in fact realized, whereas quantitative analysis is objective in nature. It seeks to set a quantity or more factual likelihood of an event occurring and the impact of that risk if it were in fact realized, meaning that qualitative outputs are given a rating or group-defined classification, whereas quantitative outputs are given a number or other definitive amount. Since qualitative is rating, those ratings must be weighted and evaluated based on those interpretations, whereas quantitative is set in numbers and priorities are set based on those findings. The numbers are also used to evaluate the aggregate effect of related risks on the project as a whole. And by giving you a quantified view of your risks via the various tools, this process enables you to do several things. First of all, it allows you to quantify outcomes. For instance, there is a 30% chance that we will have technical problems due to communication issues among our subcontractors, the outcome of which could have a consequence of $12,000 in lost production each day. It also helps you to determine how likely it is that you will be able to reach your original goals. For instance, there is an 80% chance that we will be back on schedule if the order comes in by Friday. With a quantified value for each risk, you can sort them accordingly, and then, if you wish to apply the 80-20 rule, you can focus on the top 20 of your risks only. Having your risks quantified as numbers also gives you the power to make calculations. Calculations enable you to formulate schedule predictions and adjust project cost by taking your risks into consideration. These calculations can also examine the impact that is related to changes that you are considering to make. And then finally, this quantified number that you get also empowers you to make appropriate decisions. You know that the weather might be bad in December, but by having it quantified, the report informing you that it is 80% likely for the ground to be frozen during that time and your cost could be 40,000 euros in lost time. Now you can make decisions based on numbers. When we take a look at the tools and techniques that are at your disposal in this process, you will notice that they take experienced people, time, effort, and cost money. So what if you don't have these kind of resources available on your project? Or what if you realize that your risks don't really warrant that rigorous approach that we describe in this process here? Well, the answer is simple. Skip the process. Not every project has the need to perform this in-depth risk analysis in the way described by the PMBOK guide. And you, as the project manager, in cooperation with your project management team, you can decide as you tailor your project management methodology not to perform quantitative risk analysis. Nevertheless, for the PMP exam, you still have to understand the concepts and elements of this process. Let's take a look at the ITT overview, the inputs, tools and techniques and outputs from the PMBOK guide. And what is immediately obvious here is we have one single output, updates to our project documents. Remember, this process is all about about giving a number to each and every one of our high priority risks. So, what would you guess which of the project documents we will be updating? I'm not giving much away if I tell you that it's going to be the risk register that will update. After all, we have risks without a number, we're assigning them a number, they're listed in the risk register, so we're going to update our risk register with those numbers. But that's just one example, and when we look at the outputs, you'll see what else we will update in our project documents. And here are the inputs to the Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis process. They are the risk register, which of course is where the identified risks are listed, with other relative information. The risk management plan, which has the guidelines on how we are to approach this process, and all the other processes within project risk management as well. Other management plans, such as the cost management plan and the schedule management plan, are also used, and as almost always, we use organizational process assets and enterprise environmental factors as inputs as well. The risk register is our first input because without the risk register, which contains the list of our risks, you could not quantify them. But at this point in your risk management processes, the risk register contains more than just the list of risks. We've gone through several processes already. It contains the list of the identified risks, a list of potential responses, the root causes of your risks, an updated risk category, and it will also give you the rankings, high, medium or low, that you identified in the qualitative risk analysis. This is an important piece of information because you want to concentrate on just your top risks in this process here, and by top risks we mean the high priority, high impact risks that we identified in the qualitative risk analysis process. In the plan risk management process, we created the risk management plan, whose primary purpose is to be used as a guide in all our risk management processes and activities. So it's no surprise that this plan is an input to our process here. If you recall, it is the proposed methods and plans to how we should, or how we currently intend to, conduct our project risk management processes. For this process, our plans may list which probability distribution methods are to be used and which role or roles within our project team are best suited to conduct the analysis. But more universally, the project risk management plan provides details or explanations on, for example, the project's definitions or glossary, like what exactly do you mean by a catastrophic risk, or timing, such as when in the project and how frequent we are going to be doing risk management activities, or resource allocation is also defined, such as who on the team is to work on it, or if outside procurement is needed, and also some kind of categorization will be there, namely how to group or associate various risks. Additionally, there may be information on the roles and responsibilities laid out, and there are plenty of other elements that are commonly referenced in the project risk management plan. But one more I want to point out before moving on to other management plans is the revised or updated stakeholder analysis. It is important to keep the stakeholders' risk tolerances in mind when conducting the quantitative risk analysis. And then we also have the cost and schedule management plans as input. Both are integral parts of the overall project management plan. Calculations have to be done according to your overall schedule and cost management plan. Those plans contain directions on how to manage cost and schedule, which relates to how risk in those areas are to be managed. These two management plans can very much influence how we perform our quantitative quantitative risk analysis. For instance, think about the stakeholder tolerances in terms of cost, especially when taking risk with those costs. A tight, cost-conscious organization may require extensive quantitative risk analysis to strategize against the possibility of loss on your project, or that cost consciousness may override any quantitative work to be done if the cost to perform them are too great. I have 6 examples for you regarding how the organizational process assets and enterprise environmental factors will influence how to perform quantitative risk analysis. First of all, company culture. It can determine or influence how much detail is covered or how strenuous the data collection is to be, or even the expected stakeholder tolerances. Industry findings can be assets to use to support or be used in this process. Same goes for research and white papers, whether internally conducted for this project or from past projects or externally driven. These assets can be used by our process here. Risk databases are great assets to leverage if those records and lessons learned have been gathered and kept from previous projects and phases. We can also use modeling software. When available, this asset eases the ability for data to be collected and mostly analyzed. This could consist of very complicated, highly specialized software, or even as simple as using Microsoft Excel. And for one final example before we move on, quantitative risk templates may be created by your organization's PMO, or there may be an industry standard, or you have some generic templates. All of these can be used to assist you in the process. And even though it is not officially mentioned as an input by the PMBOK guide, you should nevertheless consider your scope as well. In particular, the project scope statement that tells you what you need to deliver. If we are, for instance, a projectized company and we do similar projects again and again, then going through our scope statement allows us to identify risks. The quantitative prioritization of a risk may differ on a standard project that we have done several times before than if we had to perform a project that has never been done before by our company. We are moving on to the tools and techniques of this process. And when I tell you that there are only 3 tools and techniques in this process, and that one of them is expert judgment, and that we won't really be discussing this tool and technique of expert judgment because we've seen it so many times before, then you probably think, oh goody, that doesn't sound all that difficult for once. Well, unfortunately, it's more complex than just a numbers game, because the 2 other tools and techniques are called data gathering and representation techniques and quantitative risk analysis and modeling techniques. And as you can tell by their names, these are really groups of several different techniques that are brought together under these broad terms. Included in these 2 groups are also the decision tree and the expected monetary value. We have a separate lesson for these 2, and we will not be discussing them here in this lesson. I've gone ahead and I have grouped our tools and techniques into 2 broad categories. The first group are techniques that allow you to gather data and then to display the data. And there are 3 techniques that I would put under this data gathering and representation technique. They are interviewing, probability distribution, and expert judgment. And the second group are those techniques that allow you to do modeling and analysis of your risk data. And there are 4 techniques that we know under this name, which is perform, quantitative risk analysis and modeling techniques. And these 4 are the sensitivity analysis, the expected monetary value analysis, the decision tree analysis, as well as modeling and simulation techniques, and expert judgment. As you can see, expert judgment is used in both groups that I created here, because expert judgment will help you on both sides. But more than that, Expert judgment also helps you interpret the data and determine the effects that your risks have on cost and schedule. Now that you have seen these two groups and names, you may not have recognized all of them. That is normal because risks is one of those sections on the PMP exam that many of us have little experience in. But the terms and the related tools and techniques, they can be studied and learned for the exam. They are not all that difficult, so let's look at them. The first data gathering and representation technique is interviewing. Now, this tool and technique you'll definitely be familiar with. We have used this technique in other processes as well. Here, however, the goal is to obtain factual information to use in the analysis and not feeling or anecdotal evidence. The more reliable and credible the source, the better. So ask your experts, whether you do this in person or virtually, whether one-on-one or in a panel discussion. Or in most cases, the experts are working on analysis and returning results to you, and then you are probing for more data or clarification. What can be asked is dependent on the project, but common questions are validation and solid data on estimates. You can also ask them about design risks or data that is collected on the probabilities of designs or plans and how risky they are. You can also ask them if there are any tests or industry data to back up the likelihood or impact of the realized risks, as well as findings from past projects or similar endeavors. Experts will know about those. To retain its factual accuracy, asking for the reason for the estimate or analysis is crucial to collect. The data backing up an expert's claim or verifying its connection to the project risk at hand is important. Probability distribution is the second data gathering and representation technique. For this, we have to take a look at the probability theory, and this is best done with an example. So let's assume that I need to drive from one area in town to another, and on the way I have to pass 4 traffic lights. And for the sake of this example, let's assume that there is an 80% chance that each traffic light is green. So go ahead. What is my chance that I will get from start to finish with all green traffic lights? 4 traffic lights green in a row without ever having to stop. What do you think my probability is on this one? Did you think it might be 80% if we do this in a series? No, it's a lot less, because we have to multiply the percentages with each other, because the events are in a sequence. In this example, I have 4 traffic lights that follow each other, and each to be green is 80%. If I pass the first one at green, I have 80% left. Then, if I pass the second one green, I have 80% of 80% left, and 80% of 80% is 64%. When I pass the third at green, I have 80% of 64, which is 51. And finally, the fourth traffic light, if it's also green, then I have just reached 80% of 51%, and that is 41%. So my chance that I can pass all 4 traffic lights without ever having to stop is just 41%. Now let's exchange our traffic lights here with schedule activities. And again, with each schedule activity, I have an 80% chance that it will be completed on time. So if we have 4 schedule activities after each other, each with an 80% chance of completing on time, what is our probability that all 4 will be completed on time? The calculation is exactly the same one. It is 41%. And this is the probability theory, which is part of probability distribution. And the rule is probability of events occurring in a sequence must be multiplied to calculate the probability of all events. Normal distribution is your most common display of the probability distribution, also commonly known as the bell-shaped curve, because all normal distributions will end up looking like what you see here on the screen. It kind of looks like a bell. The implications relating to the normal distribution are that 68.26 of the total inside of this curve fall within 1 sigma. 95.46% fall under 2 sigma, and 99.73% fall within 3 sigma. So within a normal distribution, the majority of the risks will come to be within 3 standard deviations or sigma from the average or your mean. Then we also have beta distribution, which is frequently used in the quantitative analysis. It is a distribution that has just 2 parameters that are usually called A and B. Depending on the risk values identified, it usually is in the form of a curve that is slightly more asymmetrical, skewing to one side more than to the other. For risk-related activities, beta distribution can help identify the duration of a task or activity. If the project team is given the minimum and maximum durations, then the beta distribution method can be used to estimate the likely amount of time it will take to complete a project activity. Beta distribution models events which are constrained to take place within an interval that is defined by a minimum and maximum value. Hence, this is also used in PERT or time completion estimates. By using either the mean and standard deviation or the minimum and maximum durations, the project team can now use data to calculate parameters for beta distribution. We also have triangular distribution, which is a statistical distribution that increases linearly from a minimum to a maximum based upon an arbitrary value of x, and then decreases from the maximum to a minimum. For example, let's say your project is to dig for oil deposits. The risks is that no oil may be extracted, and it's too costly just to keep drilling on each spot until you hit the jackpot. So your geologists may come back with this analysis based on a selected spot. A is defined as the minimum, so that is 0.5 million barrels. C is defined as the peak, 2.5 million barrels, and B is defined as the most likely probability at 1.2 million barrels. The triangular distribution provides the project team with a probability density for each value of x. This is best used when hard data is scarce and when you're able to work with a part of the sampling population to make an educated guess. Our next tool and technique is the sensitivity analysis, and what you see building up here on the screen is a tornado diagram, which is pretty much the standard way of displaying the results of the sensitivity analysis. The idea behind the tornado diagram is examining the variables that have the most potential to inflict an outcome. Some variables have a greater effect and some have a smaller effect on the outcome. The tornado diagram shows these in a descending form, presenting a quick, visible way to delineate the results. You can see that we have a center line here, which is the neutral line. For each risk, we will then define what negative and what positive effect our risk may have on the project. And as you can see from this as well, the risks at the top of the tornado diagram has the most risk, and the ones at the bottom have the least risk. And by the way, the reason why this is called a tornado diagram, because it sort of looks like a tornado. Here are a couple of red lines to show you what the tornado funnel there is like. Okay, they're not all that very well drawn. After all, I'm a project manager and not an artist, but I think you can clearly make out the shape of the tornado there. I'm not sure if you remember these two images here. We saw them as part of our lesson on the develop schedule process when we talked about the what-if analyses and the Monte Carlo analyses. In develop schedule, we used these tools to calculate the effect of optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely durations on our schedule. Here in perform quantitative risk analysis, we do something very similar. We will use the modeling capabilities of the Monte Carlo analysis to determine what effect our risks have on our project objectives. Our primary focus here in this process is giving numbers, and so the result of performing a Monte Carlo analysis here in the quantitative risk analysis process might be that as an outcome we have a 75% chance of finishing our project at a cost of $50 million. Expected monetary value and decision tree analysis are powerful tools and techniques used to predict outcomes and possibilities based on statistical uncertainty. They are so powerful we've given them their own lesson, so check out that lesson for in-depth coverage of that topic here. For now, remember that expected monetary value and decision tree analyses are part of the risk analysis and modeling techniques. For this process, there is a single output: project document updates, essentially having the outcomes from the performance of the process reflected in the appropriate project artifacts. Primarily here, we're talking about updates to the risk register. And here are some of the most common updates to our risk register. First of all, probabilistic analysis of the project. These are estimates based on certain possibilities and what would be the effect if they do or do not occur. And we will also provide quantitative data to help direct decisions in regards to tapping into reserves that we have put aside if that becomes necessary. We will give a probability of achieving cost and time objectives. This information presents probability of achieving various targets, namely the probability of reaching a selected completion date or a selected cost target, like we are 75% certain that we will be able to finish the project on time, or we are 90% certain that we will be able to finish the project under budget. We will also have a prioritized list of quantified risks, because now that we have assigned a number to our risks, we have a quantity in them and we can sort our risks by that quantity. And there may also be trends in quantitative risk analysis results. For example, if we do this process several times, we get a trend over time. And of course, there could be other project document updates. These updates to the risk register are also going to set off updates in other project documents. For instance, if the quantitative analysis has determined that there is a 92% chance that the project is going to overrun its planned budget this month, then that information is to be reflected in reports and potentially change proposals or cost communications. Let's review. Perform quantitative risk analysis aims at analyzing numerically the probability of each risk and its consequence on project objectives, while the qualitative risk analysis just gave you a high, medium, low ranking. This process here will give you a number, a numerical ranking. However, it requires more data and modeling techniques than performing the analysis in a qualitative manner. And by giving you a quantitative view of your risks via the various tools, this process enables you to decide with more factual, hard data rather than feelings or impressions. That does not mean that you need to place more value into the quantitative analysis over the qualitative analysis. It simply impresses the point that different project decisions regarding risks require different types of analysis to be performed in order to make appropriate decisions. And this concludes our look at the Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis. And now let's take your newfound knowledge and apply it to a PMP exam sample question, which is this here. Which project artifact is most likely to contain the risk categorization guidelines for quantitative analysis? Is it A, the stakeholder registry, B, the risk register, C, the risk management plan, or is it D, the sensitivity analysis? Take a moment here. The answer to this question is C, the risk management plan. Your guidelines and other details on how you and your project management team should manage the risk activities, they are documented in the risk management plan. The risk register, their answer B, may list the risk categories but often does not contain any guidelines. The sensitivity analysis is a technique that may use the guidelines. Answer D. And finally, answer A, the stakeholder registry. That's simply a distractor in this question here and not a viable answer. Before we go, here is another exam tip for you. A good way to prepare for the PMP exam is by learning the PMI frame of mind. Many of the exam questions, they will give you a typical project situation that a project manager faces, and then you need to choose the best answer. In order to choose the best answer, you should combine the situation that you are given in the question and apply best practices according to the PMBOK guide. Don't apply the rules from your own organization. Apply PMBOK guide best practices. This means you need to understand the role of the project manager from PMI's point of view. The PMBOK guide assumes that you are working in a perfect world where projects are executed by following best practices, like you have a project charter, the project manager has support from senior management, and you have the right budget to perform all project management activities that are required. After all, that ideal world is what we strive for. So, know the PMI mindset and understand how to apply the inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs to the questions asked. And with that, we have come to the end of this lesson. So it's time for Justine to say,
See you next time.
And I say, until next time.